Hello all. Welcome to World Strategy Day. Thank you, Tom, for the wonderful introduction. I am absolutely honored to be hosting our first panel today. And I am joined by three incredible speakers who I will introduce in a moment. Today's session is about making sense of the chaos, thriving amidst uncertainty. My name is Laura, Head of Strategy Execution at Cascade, based in the northwest of England. And if you've been here before, you will definitely have seen my face at one of the prior events. But if you're new here, then a huge welcome from me. So you may be wondering what we mean by chaos, and we will definitely get into that soon enough. I guarantee by the end of this session, you will have resonated with at least one example of chaos at your organization, and hopefully walk away with tactics to help you turn chaos into effective execution. So, as I mentioned, I'm joined by three wonderful speakers today. We will be chatting together, hopefully giving you as much context as we can. And then we will also make time for questions at the end. So feel free to pop them into the Q&A as we go along. So let's do some introductions. Hi, Marvena. I know you are at Bank of America working from home just outside of New York today. Thank you so much for joining us. For everybody here, Marvena has over 15 years in management consulting and financial services and has lots of expertise in strategy, change management, and driving growth initiatives. And if that's not enough, I know you have a deep commitment and passion for social impact, Marvena, so I'd love to hear more about that. We also have Will, CEO of Raconteur, a B2B media company. If you haven't checked them out yet, please do. Will has guided the company to impressive growth in the recent years and has extensive experience in uncovering what the future holds for the business world, backed by data, which we're going to hear more about today, alongside practical advice and inspiration. Super excited to learn from you today, Will. And then finally, we have Dave, Director of People Strategy at a small unknown brand called McDonald's, I think. So welcome, Dave. Very impressed hearing about your career in HR strategy, change, transformation, and also your past experiences at Deloitte and Rolls-Royce. Looking forward to talking to you all. So in this session, we're diving into chaos. Hopefully you're all ready to talk about one of my favorite topics. We're going to be figuring out where it hides, embracing that it's always part of business. We'll explore how to identify it, prepare your teams to handle it, make decisions faster, and keep moving forward despite the uncertainty. So I've personally spent my career at startups where chaos is naturally part of the everyday. But after working with hundreds of huge organizations like the McDonald's, the Bank of America's, the Rolls-Royce, it became clear to me that chaos isn't just for the startup world. It actually exists everywhere. And sometimes we have to accept that there will always be chaos, but it shouldn't come with pain and stress. So Marvena, why don't you dig in and tell us about your definition of chaos? What does that look like at Bank of America for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Laura, for the introduction, and happy to be here with my fellow panelists this morning. I think to your point, you mentioned chaos typically is associated with a new startup organization where things are trying to be defined, formed, and normed. But I agree with you, chaos exists in every organization. Personally, for me, working in financial services for the majority of my career, we live and breathe chaos in a number of different ways. I would define chaos as an unexpected outcome to a planned strategy. And that for us takes a number of different facets, from regulatory changes that we know will come down the pike, but haven't fully been defined. So we have to be prepared and nimble to adapt as things change quickly, to just unexpected financial crisis, from bank failures to bankruptcies to corruption. And I know we, as an organization, and many organizations do this, kind of plan for the unexpected through the regulatory reserves, but we never know what's coming down, and we just have to figure out a way to continue to serve our clients to the expected experience that they signed up for, while minimizing disruptions internally. And I would say, lastly, I think we all experienced just a global pandemic that no one could have defined or planned for. And while in some cases it turned out to be, some positives came out of that, but there were a number of lessons learned. So for us, chaos is just plain and simple, unexpected outcome to a planned strategy.
Amazing. Looking forward to hearing more about that. Dave, is that experience shared at McDonald's? What are your thoughts? What's coming to mind?
Of course. Look, chaos, I think it's important to call out, typically is not created by any one individual person, but rather the collective layers of your personal and professional environment that lead to that chaotic nature. At McDonald's, right, we've got over 38,000 restaurants in 119 countries, serving 70 million customers a day. And we have nearly 2 million employees working in our restaurants. And so just those numbers alone, you can imagine that it breeds chaos. And so, for me, it's about appreciating the sphere of influence versus the sphere of control, and how you use some of these basic, simple mental tools to get through your day, to get through your week, and quiet that noise.
Definitely. Will, I know you are dying to tell us some of the data that you've backed at Raconteur. How has the chaos changed over the years, do you think?
Yeah, the research that we've done, which we'll probably weave throughout this session, I'm sure, is around how decision making has changed and become so much more complicated over the years. So, I mean, we've had this gut feeling at Raconteur for a while. Given we serve a senior business community with the content we produce, the decision making has gotten more complicated. But we wanted to go and find out by how much and how has it changed. So we did this big piece of research to survey senior decision makers and ask who is involved, who isn't involved, who do you collaborate with the most, what kind of decisions are you and aren't you involved in, how has that changed over time, and so on and so forth. And it spat out some pretty interesting and eye-opening data and conclusions. There's three main takeaways. Do you want me to sort of highlight them now?
Please do, yeah.
So the first one, and probably the least surprising, is that decision-making groups are really big. I'd be really keen to hear from Dave and Marvena about their own experiences. I work for a company of less than 100 people, and I know when we were doing the lead-up chats to this, I kind of thought, my God, I've got it easy compared to these guys. But yeah, decision-making groups are getting bigger. In 2014, a company called CEB, who later got acquired by Gartner, did a similar study to us and found that on average, it was 5.4 people involved in your average business decision. Raconteur's study 9 years later, that average has now crept up to 11.4, and only 6% of the time are there fewer than 5 people involved in sort of enterprise level business decisions. 53% of the time it's 11 or more people, and 21% of the time it's more than 16. So we can see that over time there's just more and more people sitting around the decision making, not necessarily physical table, but virtual table, right? So that the groups are getting bigger. We found, secondly, that cross-departmental influence is growing at a pretty crazy rate. So your average decision maker contributes to decisions across at least 4 product or service lines outside of their immediate department. So this is, marketing directors weighing in on decisions about HR systems or whatever it might be. And the final key takeaway, perhaps the most surprising one, was seniority, and the role of seniority has really changed as well. So I think we all have this perception that it's the most senior person in the room, and that maybe the CEO is sitting there and people are just bringing stuff to him or her, and they're just going, do that. And actually that's not happening anymore. The difference between heads of departments, directors and CXOs saying I make the final decision is pretty marginal nowadays. So it's far more egalitarian, it's far more democratized, which brings about, again, complexity challenges, right? Because you've got people across seniority, across department, and loads of people all in the mix making decisions about stuff.
It must have a huge impact on kind of the agility to get to a final solution if there's constantly debates amongst lots of different experiences. Dave, Marvena, what do you resonate with that in your organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. Will completely resonate with us, especially the piece about the level of seniority and decision making is no longer completely centered at the top. We value the sense that everyone's input can be a great contributor to our strategy or success or even new ideas. So while we're a very large organization, as you can imagine, 200,000 plus people globally, but how do we still encourage and incentivize our colleagues to provide ideas, provide recommendations, suggestions to problems that they are experiencing day to day that could lead to better client success. So we do things as simple as just Innovation Challenges Day or Innovation Day, where people can submit just some thoughts or some solutions to a problem they're experiencing, which doesn't require a full exco or the board to opine on how to drive or solve the solution. I think while we are a very consensus-driven organization, it's important to recognize that not every problem needs to have the full organization's buy-in, depending on what you're solving for. So the scope of what you are attacking defines who needs to be engaged and how they need to be engaged. So something as straightforward as who should our target clients be for this specific segment really is centered around that business. So the business lead, the sales leads, maybe the products that they interface with, and at the end of the day, a summary to the appropriate management committees. But if we're talking about introducing a new product to the marketplace, as you can imagine, there are a lot more people involved in that process, from legal, compliance, and other stakeholders, just because the nature of what we're solving for is much broader. But to Will's point around decision-making can be kind of cascaded down to a number of different people, we definitely echo those same points.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
What you think?
And the the role of a middle manager in a global corporation, which I'm sure many of the attendees today can relate to. We're at the thin part of the hourglass, and increasingly, it is our responsibility to bring executives strong recommendations, decisions that just require kind of a rubber stamp and has the data to support those things, as opposed to putting the accountability on the executive to make that decision. And then on the flip side, it's our job to distill the strategy, distill the priorities, distill the chaos, to communicate clarity down to our respective teams. And as a leader today, that's only half the job. Increasingly, employees are bringing their whole selves to work, which is excellent. But that means that our obligation as leaders is to, be able to manage the mental health and the psychological safety of these employees, while also translating that strategy into execution. So it's harder than ever to be in this, position. But I think, again, with some simple frames, there's a lot we can do to control that chaos.
I have a question, Dave, on your thoughts on, like you said something really interesting about how that kind of middle role has evolved to not just be pushing tasks down and getting people to, leading teams to do their work, but rather also being able to cascade decisions upwards and cascade decisions down. How do you think that plays into a company like McDonald's, where you have lots of different types of employees? You've obviously got those in the store who a lot of time may not really care about the vision, quite honestly. I think there'll be pockets of people who really get behind the vision of McDonald's. But what about where you have that kind of mix of employees, where you have some really dedicated to the cause and others who kind of may come in and out of that? How do you manage that and deal with it?
The short answer is it's really hard. You think about all of these teams that have priorities for all of the right reasons, right? We may be trying to introduce a new sandwich or a new promotion or a new operating procedure that simplifies the drive-through. The reality is all of these disparate initiatives that are coming from the top, when they actually manifest themselves in the restaurants, it creates complete and utter chaos. And they don't know whether to, prioritize hospitality, speed, accuracy, and many of the initiatives that land in our restaurants are often conflicting with one another. So how do we govern and control all of that, knowing that more often than not, it's a 17-year-old kid, this is their first job, they're working the lunch rush at McDonald's, the drive-through is queued up with 15 cars. And so it is, something that I would say we are not good at by any stretch, because we're trying to be everything, everywhere, all at once. But we're hearing loud and clear from our people that this is not sustainable. And quite frankly, here in the US, we have 155% turnover, which is not good. And we have a huge room for improvement. And I think reducing that cognitive load, simplifying what it is that success looks like is a huge priority for us in 2024.
Interesting. Will, have you any other data points that backs up the ever-changing landscape of kind of what people are looking for when they're moving to businesses that may have a lot of chaos?
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually a couple of points I can see coming through in the chat to say, can we see the full Raconteur report? Because the three things that I just gave you with sort of headline takeaways, but there's a whole sort of write up about that, and there's it dives into things like the increasing role of involvement of HR because of the effect of decisions on people. So HR are being brought into decisions, key business decisions a lot more these days. So there's a whole host of stuff. What I think is interesting, and I don't know myself, not working for a big Goliath company, but I'd be interested to throw the question across to Dave and Marvena about whether their organizations talk about the changes in decision making, and to, at the risk of making this quite meta, like, should we be making more decisions about how we're making decisions, if you see what I mean, like, and talking about that more?
Yeah, I can start. We have made attempts at simplifying and streamlining decision making. I know many people use a RACI framework. We use a DAI framework, who has the decision, who's accountable, and who's informed. We've trained all directors and above on our decision-making methodology, and that was a huge priority for us in 2022 coming out of the pandemic. And we say it, we talk about it, we truly try to assign a single owner for some of these decisions within an initiative. But I think that there's a tendency, particularly in large bureaucratic organizations, to abdicate responsibility, because it's easier in a large organization to be a little bit more in self-preservation mode rather than having the courage to say, yes, I am accountable for this decision. And if it's the wrong decision, I will own that. So I think that comfort and rewarding failure is something that you actually need in tandem with any sort of decision-making framework. You can't simply have your philosophy around decision-making absent the ability to say, we are going to be comfortable with failure, reward failure, and not disincentivize people from being accountable.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add for me is, I guess, two things. In terms of decisions, we think of it as two key decisions that we're making holistically. It's the what we are going to do, and then the how we're going to do it. And we actually evaluate our colleagues the same way in terms of like, what did you do and how did you do it? So I think in terms of the what we're going to do, the major changes that we are navigating are just the volume of data just coming at us. So the sources of insight have increasingly kind of doubled or tripled in some cases. So where we maybe in some cases have focused primarily on what our competitors are doing, what the clients are kind of addressing, what the wallet share looks like, et cetera. But now we have to think about, well, okay, in addition to that, those wouldn't change, but there's so much more coming at us because it's not just us doing it. We have increasingly competitive threats from the technology industry, from fintechs, from other service providers who can address the same things that we are doing. So what does that mean in terms of differentiating for us? So I think those decisions still remain pretty centralized. I think what does change though is the how you do it, because then you are navigating a much more complex industry because of so many different factors. So maybe insights not just from data technology and data science, but a major input from legal, from compliance, from just partners in the emerging markets where they see other parts of the organization, or even partners from even different groups. So not just focusing on the division that we are only kind of solving for, but what are we seeing in the consumer space, in the wealth management space, in the technology space? So I think for us, it's more, at least the way I see it, is primarily the how is increasingly changing, just because there's so many ways that you can solve the same problem.
I really love the approach of kind of, I guess, like the old way, maybe 5-10 years ago, was working through your strategy in a very siloed mindset. And then you just hope that HR and IT and legal get visibility or open the deck or catch up. But nowadays it feels like there's actually more synergy with those teams that are actually going to be enabling the strategy and getting out in front of that. It seems like it's quite prevalent in your business as well.
Yeah, I guess the one thing I wanted to add as well, Laura, is I feel like a lot of people jump to technology is the answer as a backdrop. Like, if you notice, none of us actually talked about technology as like, this is your end all be all solution. Is if you don't have kind of a framework, a plan, a path, and all your considerations, technology in our mind is an enabler, a very important enabler, but absolutely it's by no means is it the solvent or the solution to the problems and conversations we're having today.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Actually, it's a conversation I'm having a very, very regularly right now with customers, when they often come to Cascade hoping this is going to solve everything. This technology, it's magic. It's going to do everything for us, but it's really only one piece of the puzzle. Like you said, it's going to enable all of the other things that you put in place, the processes and the people, and of course the technology. But it's really not a magic pill, in all honesty. What are your thoughts, Will, from as myself working in startups, I'm typically operating in 100-ish people, so we can make decisions very quick. We can fail. There's not really, any much repercussion from that. Have you experienced similar patterns in your business?
Yeah, I think so. But even in a smaller company, I think it's more complex today than it was 10 years ago. And I've been at Raconteur for 12 years, and we are making decisions and involving heads of data who we didn't used to have in our business, but are now vital to the stuff that we do and important to the decision-making process. And I think, even in small companies, the trend is that we all, I think, want to involve more people in our decisions, because we all understand that with diversity of thought and experience, we can probably make better decisions. But so you'll see that trend happening in small businesses as well as large ones. But there must be a sort of a tipping point, if you like, where too many people from too many different departments, perhaps across too many seniority layers, make the decision so hard to make that either that decision takes a very, very long time, or in some cases that decision doesn't get made, and nothing happens, and therefore the ability to even get something wrong is removed. I think the dynamics are similar in small and large companies. They're probably quite relative. But I think we need to look to make sense of this. We need to look at what are the driving factors. Why is it getting more complicated? Is it people don't want to take as much personal risk on? Probably. Is it that tech facilitates communication in a way that it didn't used to? So it's easier to get people around a virtual table to make decisions. Probably that as well. What are the drivers, and how do we fix those things or put controls around those things in order to make sensible decisions in an agile and fast manner? Because most people would agree a quick decision is better than a slow one.
Yeah. And what do you think the future of business looks like? I think there's a pretty bold statement on your website, which is you're trying to uncover what the future of business looks like for us. Where do you think your mind is heading, or where's the research taking us, do you think?
I think that the future of leadership the future of business leadership does involve people being more clued up now on the things that go on in a whole business, more so than they had to, again, 10 years ago. Because if you are going to contribute to the decision-making process, and there's more cross-departmental collaboration going on and group bigger and so on and so forth, you need to know more about what your colleague in a different department is facing. What are their goals and objectives? What are their barriers? If you're going to be able to help. So for me, the future of leadership is everyone being, I don't want to say a jack of all trades, but like everyone being a bit more clued up on the things that affect a whole business, rather than just operating in a very siloed fashion as perhaps things used to happen, I would say.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? It's, I think back maybe like my own career 5 or 10 years ago, I probably had no awareness of what was actually going on in the rest of the business, but actually having that ability to almost preempt what's coming or forward look can bring a lot to the table, because you can make decisions faster, you can influence decisions. Dave, Marvena, what's been your experience, I guess, of the kind of the new workforce coming into your businesses? I know there's lots of employees in your organization, so you must also be seeing that evolution as well.
Yeah, I can kick off. I would say I'm increasingly grateful for the opportunity I had to start my career in consulting, because it kind of gives you that brain muscle to just like learn something new and then apply it and then learn again and then reapply it. I think the way that we are doing business today, I completely agree with Will. Like, you just have to understand every other part of the organization. I think gone are the days of, oh, but I'm just in marketing, I don't need to understand operations, or I'm a tech guy, so I don't need to understand business. No, I think you don't need to be an expert with a PhD in quantitative physics or something, but you definitely have to know how all of the different pieces of the organization work together and who are we solving for. So at the end of the day, whether or not you are client serving or you're in a control function or a more of a support function, you need to understand who our clients are, who the end clients are ultimately, and what drives them at the highest level. And I would say the last thing for me is a lot of our new colleagues either have experience in coding or at least understand when they hear Python, it's not just the snake. So I think it's really important to know you don't need to be coding everything, but to at least understand what it means, how do you solve something, and how can you at least understand a code that you see to leverage the right partners to figure it out, but never be so siloed going forward.
Yeah, and I would say it's a bit of a two-sided coin. I think on the one hand, new workers entering the workforce have more credibility and the attention of more senior folks in the company than ever before. They're able to bring their new ideas, and we welcome those ideas. Now, on the flip side, we certainly struggle with the digital employee experience and how work gets done and how people collaborate in the professional lives from their personal lives. And I would say most companies are not keeping pace with what a 20-something is used to in perhaps university or in their personal lives. So there's this dichotomy that we have to wrestle with. And I think the good ones always rise to the occasion, and they appreciate that the company isn't going to be as fast as TikTok, but we still have an obligation to think that way. One of the things that I've been really imposing on our kind of operational leaders in the restaurants is we need to go from a culture of toolkits to TikToks. So when a new burger rolls out, we don't need a 30-page PDF to explain all of the different operational procedures. We could probably tap somebody in the restaurant who's going to do it and make a 30-second TikTok that's going to be more effective. And so, it's just about getting our executives comfortable with those new ways of working while also appreciating the ideas that come from our new workers.
I love that. Yeah, it feels so relevant. You're so right. Like, yeah, why you're in the restaurant? Of course, you're going to pull up a TikTok, and then you're like, oh yeah, I immediately know what I need to do now. I think we have just about 1 or 2 minutes left. So I had a question. A bit of an observation from what everybody's saying. I think there's a few takeaways that I think we can leave the audience with from my perspective. One would be, it's not enough to enable your workforce with just the vision that you're striving for, but also the values that you want to hold them to, the toolkits, like you said, that they should be operating, or the guardrails that they should be operating in, where they sit in that kind of decision tree. Are they accountable? Are they making the decision? Are they influencing the decision? As well as the strategy and external factors of who you're selling to, or what your product or service offers and what that truly means. There's a lot that you can enable your workforce with. What would be your final takeaway that you could give the audience to help them make sense of the chaos, help them to thrive or foster a good environment for the new generations. Will, maybe you want to go first. You're off mute.
Yeah, I think, well, this might sound really simple, but I would say expect it and embrace it. Like you've got to be a little bit crazy to be a company leader in some ways, because stuff happens and you didn't expect it to. So I think a key part of actually coping with chaos is to understand that it's going to happen. Whether it's things going, actually one thing we didn't touch on today is like good chaos, where things go unexpectedly well. But usually we talk about it in the negative sense, I suppose. But yeah, expect that things are not going to go according to plan. That feeling of chaos will be lower when you then make the plan. So if you're expecting it and to an extent you can embrace it, dare I say, sometimes enjoy the challenge of working through it, you're going to be far better placed to actually come out the other side in a good place.
Amazing. Marvena, what do you think? What's your key takeaway for the group?
Yeah, no, thanks so much. I think I saw a question around how do you encourage kind of the bottoms up decision making in the organization. I guess one of my biggest takeaways is we've shared a lot today, but one thing that should be keen to everyone is don't wait for the manager to come to you and say, what do you think we should do next? I think everyone here has very good insight and access to information, and you're living and breathing whatever the challenge is. So be proactive in kind of going up to saying, here's what I see, here's what I think we can do. Hey, I heard X, Y, and Z is doing ABC. Have we considered that internally? And kind of maybe start something that could be the seed for a brand new change or an innovation. So I think it's a collective decision making that we've been talking about. But it may seem that it's always top down, but it should definitely be you taking the ownership and be as engaged and interested in what we're doing to come up with solutions as well.
Maybe make a few TikToks for the leadership team. Sounds like good.
Very excellent parting advice. I completely agree with Will and Marvena. The only thing I might add is, and I'll quote an author, Yuval Noah Harari, who said, in a world deluged by irrelevant information, clarity is power. And I think, look, the teams and individuals who bask in ambiguity, who know that it is part of life and operate with that assumption morning, noon, and night are the ones that are going to excel. They're the ones that are going to get greater visibility, greater career opportunities. And ultimately, you rarely think back on your career on the weeks that you only put in 35, 40 hours and said, wow, I really learned a lot, right? It's the ones where you're working nights and weekends, navigating that complexity that makes most memorable and are the most character building. So just embrace it.
And have fun while you're doing it. Definitely.
Right.
Thank you all. All right, let's go to Q&A. I think while we're waiting for the questions to come up, there may be a few polls on the side. We'd love to hear from you on whether you've seen decision-making at your organization involve more people. Let us know in the poll, in the comments, and whether you consider there's more collaboration since kind of the pre-pandemic era. Let's go to some questions. Yep, there's the poll firing up now. Okay, a couple of questions. So feel free to jump in, any of you, if you feel strongly. The first one we have is, how do you go about identifying stakeholders to classify the different chaos drivers? Interesting question. Anyone got any thoughts?
I can start. I live in this world. So, I mean, look, there's a lot of really good tools for stakeholder management. I think I'm always kind of the simplest tools often work the best. Many of you may have heard of kind of the no, feel, do. So before we take action, before we communicate, before we make decisions, look at your organization and identify those clusters of groups and say, what do we want them to know? What do we want them to feel? What do we want them to do? And from there, you build a communications plan. Too often I see communication specialists, building out a 12-month calendar of how we're going to roll out this initiative, but they don't do that upfront due diligence to define those people. And then the other piece is we love thinking that broadcasting announcements, And having these really formal newsletters and things like that are what's going to move people from point A to point B. But the reality is a lot of times it's the meeting behind the meeting or the one-off conversations. And so we talk a lot about stakeholder relationship management, which is much more the informal, and making sure that we have people within the team that are dedicated to managing that one individual who might be particularly contentious, or that handful of folks who have been on the sidelines for too long, and really focus on building those relationships through informality.
Awesome. Let's see what we've got next. Any more questions? I did see a few coming through while we were talking. So chaos and noise the same? If not, what is the differentiator? Yeah, we were just talking about the good versus the bad chaos, and there's always going to be chaos. But does anyone feel strongly about kind of figuring out which is the right term?
Yeah, I can go a little bit. I think we kind of live in this very noisy environment. So I think I would define it in two different ways. I think noise, while it's still information, reacting to it doesn't change your outcome. So if it's just FYI, things that you need to know, or if we all of a sudden change where our main headquartered office is, like, that's not really going to change how we interact with our clients, as a made up example. But in terms of the chaos, I think to me, it's if you either ignore it or minimize it or trivialize it, can have small, medium, large impact to what happens to your business, whether it's the customer interaction, the client interaction, and or down to the nitty-gritty of your financials and your reputation. So I think, to me, chaos, noise to me is information to listen to, just good to know. I wouldn't just kind of like tone it down and mute it all. But chaos needs to be addressed in action, into the point around how do you figure out who needs to be engaged, define the impact area to figure out what's most prominent, but definitely do not ignore the chaos.
Super clear. Thank you so much. Hopefully that answers your question. I think we've got time for a couple more. So with the inclusion of more people in the decision-making process, what are the key decision-making tools and skills that strategists should employ to keep teams focused and aligned with the organizational goals? That's a long one. I'm trying to think what a good answer could be from my experience with that. I mean, oh, sorry, go ahead, Marvena.
I would say for me, myself or our team, we don't necessarily focus on the tools themselves, rather how are we tracking the performance of whatever we established. So that can be, I think, getting lost in the solutioning of like, well, how do I do this? It's back to me, technology is the enabler, not necessarily the solution. But if you've kind of defined, here's what we're going to do, we expect one of these three outcomes. Great outcome is a target success rate, a client penetration rate, increase in revenue target that you're established. And you can kind of backtrack to that as the time evolves to say, have we achieved what we said? Are we getting close? Should we deviate? How you do that can be as simple as pen and paper, ideally not, to Excel tracking, to much more complicated tools. But the underlying fundamental step is that you define it, you're tracking it, and you're measuring it, and you're getting people to buy in to how you're doing that.
I love that. It's it's kind of, I hadn't quite created the connection in my brain as I was reading the question, but I think it really comes down to setting out what you want to achieve, but then making sure that you know how you're going to measure the progress, the impact, the target. It's very measurable, it's very impactful, as opposed to setting something you want to achieve, and then a few months later, you don't know how, whether it's gone successfully or not. I think the other thing that I was thinking as you were talking was empowering the owners of those initiatives or goals to put their hand up when they need support, and being able to raise that sooner rather than later, I think, is another key piece. So yeah, empowerment, visibility, making sure those goals are measured, I think, were the key takeaways. I think we have, oh, sorry, go ahead, Will.
I was just going to say on that, I think building it bottom up is really important, because you should almost try and see, and this will be easier in small organizations, but can you almost design what you want yourself? And then if you need a tool, is there a tool out there that does that and makes it easier for you? I think the danger of systems is that you can go out there, look at all these shiny tools and go, well, that one looks amazing, introduce it, and then top down, find out no one actually likes using it. So you can, get lost in that conversation a little bit. And I think it's important to work out what you need and what you want. And then does a tool exist for that? If so, great, go ahead with it. But maybe don't try and find one for the sake of it.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, it's one of the things we strongly recommend when rolling out Cascade is really driving those champions from the bottom up. And it's not seen as a kind of top-down management tool, but rather you're empowering champions within the business who are going to operate chaos and strategy anyway, but now they have a better way of doing things. I think we may have time for one last question, and then we'll wrap up and introduce the next one. So how do you ensure clarity of priorities to best enable more people to effectively participate in decision making? So I've definitely got a few comments on this, making sure that the priorities of the business are clear. I think that goes a long way. But Dave, you're off mute. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think a very important piece of this is storytelling. So right now at McDonald's, we are going through a very ambitious transformation agenda where we are rolling out new systems for HR, finance, supply chain operations globally. We're restructuring, new op model, new processes, new org structure, offshoring some of our redundant tasks. And then we're also simultaneously looking at new menu innovation. We're, for the first time in over a decade, planning to build 1,800 new restaurants in the next 24 months. And so you think about all of these priorities and like what that strategy is, and you start to say, well, what the heck are we actually focused on? But if you take an out-of-body experience and you say, well, if I was the managing director for McDonald's Italy, what does this actually mean for me? And the story starts to clarify itself. The reality is to fuel the next chapter of growth at McDonald's, we need to get efficiencies in our back office operations so we can take those savings and invest in the future of digital customer experience, new restaurants and new footprints, and new menu innovation that takes McDonald's into the next chapter. And all of a sudden, what feels like a ton of priorities, a discombobulated strategy, can succinctly be told in 1 to 2 sentences.
Amazing. Yeah, it's all about the focus and telling the right story. I think we're going to cover more on that in the next session. So hopefully everyone can stick around and hear some more. Thank you all so much for contributing today. It's been incredible to hear your stories and perspectives. Hopefully you can stick around. We will be hosting another panel. So Luke, my wonderful colleague, will be hosting panel 2, all about embracing chaos. So we will meet over in the next session, and thank you all. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.